Hi, Juno News. Alexander Brown back for another episode. Host of Not Sorry, writer, communicator, campaigner. Always thrilled to be here. And while you are here, take advantage of our promo code. I know a guy, he'll hook you up. It is me, junonews.com/not sorry for 20% off. I spoke before the House of Commons Immigration Committee on Tuesday, where I laid the blame for Canada's high unemployment, the failing economic productivity, failing healthcare system, poor housing market, and low public opinion of Canada's immigration system at the feet of the Liberal government. On the temporary foreign worker and international mobility program front, it wouldn't be wrong to view these programs, for example, as distortionary government subsidies or welfare for unproductive businesses. The effects disproportionately harm younger Canadians who are priced out of the labor market. As former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge has warned, the last thing we want is a bunch of low productivity businesses hanging on because we provide them cheap labor. Not only then is that bad for Canadian productivity, but there's also a big risk that it contributes to wage suppression and job displacement for Canadian workers. Can you tell the theme of the episode yet? Moreover, Canada's delusional quest to replace US trade, it isn't going well. We've now even been passed by Mexico as our neighbor's top export partner. As Tristan Hopper writes, virtually every economic analysis on the issue of trade diversification has concluded that although it's a good idea in principle, Canada remains a country whose prosperity has been disproportionately owed to the fact that it happens to sit atop the most powerful economy in human history. And there's word now that Trump may soon use the USMCA withdrawal as a bargaining tactic. Trade experts are warning, and that could be another curveball for us. The layoffs are mounting. This situation is not improving, as 1,000 workers at Algoma Steel were just handed pink slips before the holidays. The excuses for not securing a trade deal, for continuing so much of this status quo, it's harming Canadians and their pocketbooks. Let's talk to Professor Ian Lee of Carleton University, frequent Juno guest. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to diagnosing our economic woes for a poli-sci student like myself. And first, a word from our sponsor.
Folks, I want to take a minute to thank today's sponsor, which is Macamee College. So Macamee College has an applied politics and public affairs program. It's a 2-year evening online program available across Canada. Students have the opportunity to learn to run political campaigns, organize grassroots movements, and push policy in the right direction. Students will also have hands-on placements in their community or with the party they believe in. So when they graduate, they have real job-ready experience. Applicants only need a high school diploma or homeschooling equivalent to apply. Intake starts in September and January. And folks, we are very excited to announce that anyone who applies and is successful in enrollment will get a $500 scholarship from Juno News. So apply using our link. It's in the description. You can go to candicemalcolm.com/Macamee. That's MAKAMI. And if you apply through that link, and you're successful, you get a $500 Juno News scholarship. You know, I went to the University of Alberta and studied political science. And the thing you realize when you're doing a university degree is that it doesn't lead you to a job. And so for me, after 3 years of being a political science student, I looked around and realized I had no job skills. I had never worked in politics. Everything was theoretical. It was all in the classroom. And I had to start working on political campaigns just to get my foot in the door. The hard thing about politics is that you need experience to get a job, but jobs require experience. And so doing something like this, I mean, the fact that you can do it online, the fact that you can do it on the evening is really helpful. If you're interested in politics and you're watching the show, I presume you are. This is something that you really might want to consider, or hey, maybe one of your adult children might be interested in doing something like this. So again, check out this link at candicemalcolm.com/Macamee College.
Professor Ian Lee of Carleton University, Sprott School of Business joins us again. Professor, thank you.
My pleasure, Alex.
Professor, 1,000 workers were just handed pink slips at Algoma Steel. I believe that takes us to close to 41,000 total directly impacted by this protracted tariff situation. That's not much of a Christmas present for thousands of families. Is it time to park some of the political gamesmanship and make a deal here?
You mean the United States?
Yes.
Yes, I do. I have argued a couple of points, very big picture. I've given a couple of papers actually in the last little while. I testified before the Senate House Committee, Finance Committee, and the House Committee as well. that I argue that we Canada, that's not the royal we, Canadian governments have made a big mistake over the last approximately 60 years, since roughly the time of the Autopac. And we have gone down a rabbit hole that we believe that we could, using government regulation and subsidies, corporate subsidies, we could lift up the manufacturing sector writ large into becoming a major international player, a competitor. And in almost, I would argue, in defiance of the laws of economics. I say that because we're a small country, even though I think a lot of Canadians are confused by I mean, what I'm saying, we think, well, because we're gigantic geographically, and we are, we think, well, that means that we're the same power and importance as the United States. We're not.
Yeah.
They're 32 trillion, we're 2.5 trillion. We are, as Pierre Trudeau famously said, they're the 10-ton elephant and we're the mouse. The elephant sneezes and the mouse catches pneumonia. So we made a very large mistake in going down that road, chasing the manufacturing going down the rabbit hole, pouring billions and billions, not just on auto industry, Bombardier, and many other similar attempts to try to create an industrial policy. At the same time, we denigrated and sneered at and dismissed our resource sector, saying it was low tech, it was dirty, it was 19th century, it was hewers of wood, drawers of water, wrong way to go. And yet we have trillions of dollars in natural resources, and we have a comparative advantage in natural resources. We do not have a comparative advantage in manufacturing because we're too small. We're smaller than the state of California. And yet, throughout my entire lifetime, my adult lifetime, from the 60s on through, I mean, I was a kid in the 60s, we've been trying to, create these superpowers, if you will, whether it was in Bombardier or General Motors and the auto industry and so forth, in pursuing that, while we were deliberately suppressing our natural resource sector. And this culminated in the last 10 years, in the Trudeau years, where we developed very clear policies to suppress the development of natural resources. Well, now the chickens are finally coming home to roost, and we are coming up against the reality that we are not $32 trillion GDP. We're a $2.5 trillion GDP. And so I think we're realizing slowly, but most assuredly, we're realizing the futility of this idea that we can direct and create through industrial policy. We can create chosen instruments that will do our beck and call and become world-class competitors. And we're learning that that's not, we don't have that scale. We don't have the economies of scale. We don't have the comparative advantage. And now we're running up against the reality, that reality. And so we have to do a deal with the United States that I think plays to our strengths, which are natural resources and critical minerals, and not to pretending that we're going to be a world-class manufacturing superpower along with China, Europe, and the United States, which we never were, are not now, and never will become.
Yeah, and I think of, and I'm reading about it recently, even Diefenbaker's push in the I believe the 50s to strengthen trade ties with the UK were failures due to it was just from the jump there was the overwhelming advantage of trading with the US. Can you elaborate on why similar diversification attempts by previous governments, why they too failed? We can obviously look at today and look at the self-sabotage of the last 10 years, but maybe a little history lesson for our viewers.
I'm going to use a fancy term, and I want to use this term, and I'm saying it with a bit of a smile, okay? And it's the big fancy academic word propinquity. And
that's a new one for me. Okay.
Propinquity is a big fancy word which means being close.
Okay.
And a famous American president, John F. Kennedy, who had quite a sense of humor, even though I didn't always agree with his policies, he said, nothing propinques like propinquity. In other words, nothing beats being closer than being close. Okay, let me bring that down to brass tacks and explain what I'm talking about. Let me state the obvious. The United States is right next door. 8 to 9,000 kilometers, right next door. 90% of Canadians live within 150 kilometers of the U.S. border. So, and there's all kinds of people, literally going back to Pierre Trudeau and the third way it was called, We're saying, no, we're not going to trade with those people. They speak the same language. We're on the same continent. We have the same time zones. We have very similar endowments in terms of the geographic endowments. And we're going to instead deal with countries halfway around the world, completely different legal systems, often completely different languages, and we're going to develop relationships with them. This is just silly. And for those who still don't agree with me, I've studied different countries that are pairs. I've taught in Poland from 1991 until the present every year. Well, guess who is the biggest investor in Poland? It's the country that it shares the border with. It's called Germany. It's not the United States halfway around the world. Germany shares the East German, West Polish border. I've driven through there in a car on road trips, and you should just see the German factories all through the West Polish countryside. It's just stunning. Then you go and look at Brazil and Argentina, or Argentina and Chile. You tend to trade over centuries with the people next door. In fact, you get intermarriage. You get cross immigration. You look at Alsace-Lorraine, which went back and forth between France and Germany for 500 years. I've been quite a few times there. And the trade and commerce between Alsace-Lorraine, between France and Germany is it's just stunning how obvious it is. And so people that are trying to say, let's deny geography, let's deny it, let's pretend we're not next door to the United States, is just silly. I mean, geography, that famous phrase, geography is destiny.
Yeah.
And there's a reality to it. I mean, I've crossed that border without exaggeration since I was a child. I grew up in Eastern Ontario. I estimate I've crossed that border probably 600 times. Imagine. I mean, we would go down in the 60s. I was a kid, and my parents would say, let's go for a picnic lunch, and we'd go down onto the U.S. side. We'd cross over at Prescott. And we'd cross over for the day. I mean, I've gone so many day trips to the United States, it's not funny. And that's just the propinquity factor. They are right next door, and they speak the same language predominantly. They're predominantly English is the majority language, same here. English common law there, English common law here. We have many of the same companies in both sides of the border. So of course we're going to trade with the United States. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to diversify our trade, but there are people who really think that we're going to go from 70% to something close to zero. And I just think it's delusional. If we can get from 70% down to 60%, that'll be stunning.
Yeah, it strikes me that the outlier, I was reading over some data before talking to you, which it's Austria and Germany. Austria has a kind of a balanced dependency on Germany where it's actually 1/3, which that's very impressive. But of course you have, all of Europe right at your doorstep.
You do.
When you're sharing it with your neighbor, same thing with Mexico and America. It's like you tend to do all your work with them. And what strikes me as crazy as a non-business minded individual is we're even framing our U.S. trade ties right now as a vulnerability.
That's right.
Not a strength, a vulnerability. And we're focusing on these non-binding agreements with regions like the Middle East and Africa. We're talking seemingly exports of 1.6%. On what degree of delusion is this? Or can we make up some of that number in the aggregate?
You're absolutely right. In fact, I would argue, and I don't belong to any political party. I don't donate money to any political party. But the vision of what some journalists have called, I think correctly, the Laurentian elites, who are the political decision makers in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, not the corporate elites, but the political elites. They've had this vision literally since the 60s that the United States was not that good a country. Maybe we should try and deal with them a lot less and go somewhere else. And it became the politically dominant viewpoint. And without looking at the sheer scale and size of the United States, all of the natural advantages of the north-south trade flow that occurred between the two countries, and imagined that we were going to go halfway around the world to trade, notwithstanding the incredible transportation barriers, the costs, the logistics, the time zone changes. And I'm saying this for anyone listening who might say, well, that Ian Lee is a real ethnocentric guy. I've taught in Europe over 100 times, probably more than 99% of Canadians. Oh. I've been teaching in China every year since 1997. I've traveled around the world many, many, many times. I've been to the United States in 44 of 50 states on road trips. So I've been to a ton of countries. I'm not ethnocentric saying we shouldn't deal with those countries.
Yeah.
Of course, we should deal with whoever we want to trade with. But the reality is, because of the propinquity factor of being that they are right next door, and there's lots of similarities between the two countries. Yes, there's differences between Canada and the United States, but there are many, many similarities. And so I think that those blinkers of the Laurentian elites have caused us to see the United States as a, quote, threat, instead of saying we just had the wrong package over the last 60 years. We were trying to become a competitor. Imagine a competitor of the United States, which is just as far as I'm concerned, is just madness on steroids. Instead of saying we should be a partner, they need certain things from us. They've always needed natural resources. And we should, right now, they need critical minerals because China has them by the throat hold. And the United States has a desperate shortage of critical minerals. We should be talking about this almost every day of the week. Instead of saying, how can we move away from the United States? Why don't we say, well, what are they good at? They're obviously a manufacturing superpower. There's three in the world: China, Europe, US. We're not. We're never going to become one, no matter our delusions and thinking that we can. So let's give up those silly delusions and say, we're not going to try to continue to pour billions of dollars down a manufacturing rabbit hole, trying to turn us into something we will never become, a manufacturing superpower. So yet we've got trillions, literally trillions of dollars in natural resources. And I don't just mean oil and gas. We've got timber. We've got electricity, James Bay. We've got nuclear. We've got potash. We've got agriculture. We've got critical minerals. And yet what have we done for the last 60 years? We've tried to suppress our natural advantages and artificially create an advantage we don't have, never did, do not now, and will not in the future. And we still are, there are people in Canada perpetuating this false vision for the future for Canada.
And standing in the way, seemingly even now, of a moment where we claim to be serious about major projects, where we're sending mixed signals on memorandums of understanding. Okay, I'll let you build a pipeline to the coast, but the tanker ban stays in place. Well, it's like, well, where the heck's it supposed to go? And so it incredibly frustrating.
Yes.
Carney and these Carney trade missions, they've resulted in, I believe Tristan Hopper in the Post used the term non-committal bromides to borrow a quote there, rather than substantive deals. In your view, what metrics should Canada use to evaluate the success of this kind of international outreach? And if you're a business leader, how could you influence a more effective outcome right now?
I mean, I use it with my students all the time. I said, we economists and policy analysts try and make this into something very, very complex. And I'm a very simple guy because I grew up on a farm and many, many years ago, and I believe in this thing called arithmetic. I tell my students, I can't, calculus is too complicated for me and algebra is too complicated. Let's just stay with arithmetic because I understand 1 and 1 is 2 and 2 and 2 is 4 and so forth. So I look at the United States and I say, okay, there's 196 countries in the world. We could trade with all of them, right? Because they're all equally useful for Canada. Well, wait a minute. The United States is 32 trillion. There's no other country on planet Earth that is even close to the United States. China is 20 trillion. Far, far behind. And then you look at Europe. Okay, they're about 19, 20 trillion. And then everybody else falls down to single digits. And they're halfway around the world. There's more arithmetic. They're thousands and thousands of kilometers away. They have very, very different legal systems. They have very, very different cultures, very different languages. And so when you look at these herd realities, and yet there are people who want to deny these realities. The US is right next door. It is the largest economy in the world. It is the modern Roman Empire. It is the role today that was played by Rome at the time of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, the dominant superpower in the world. And we're talking about running away from there and going halfway around the world where we've never had a trading tradition with any of these countries, and they're very small GDPs. I mean, these are countries that have single-digit GDPs.
Yeah.
It's just stunning that people can live with these delusions and kid themselves that we are going to suddenly stop trading or slowly stop trading with the United States and go halfway around the world and start trading with countries we've never traded with at that level or magnitude. It's not going to happen.
So, where are the business voices vocalizing the opinion that you are now? I mean, it makes a ton of sense to me in our audience, and it's great to hear such a champion of common sense. But like, is anyone doing this right now in our business lobby? Is anyone saying this in the Globe and Mail?
Yeah, I think I'm not as critical as you are on that point. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce has been making the argument. I've certainly read their position papers.
Okay.
And they have made some arguments. Look, the United States, we're going to continue to trade with them in a very major way. There
Yes.
are some voices out there, but I take your point is very well taken that the voices are not loud enough, they're not strong enough,
Yeah.
and there's not enough of them to state these realities.
And I get that they're scared. They don't want to be branded as traitors or something right now from perhaps the Elbows Up crew. But it would be so great to hear this on a day-to-day basis from our leaders.
And I think we have to. I mean, I just went out and I'm giving presentations to business associations and business community in the business community and so forth, and I'm talking about this, and I'm always amused, I guess is the right word, by the number of people who say, "What are you talking about? We can't have a made in Canada car." Yes, we can. I said, "Have you looked?"
Who's going to make it? Yeah.
I said, "You looked at the global R&D just for the auto manufacturing industry." I've got the data. It was done by the European Association of Manufacturers. That's Volkswagen and company. 150 billion euros last year. That's a year. That's not cumulative to the beginning of time. Yeah. That's the amount spent in the world by the 10 largest auto manufacturers for R&D to build cars. That's $200 billion a year. And then I looked up the capital, because you got to build the factories and buy the technologies to actually make the cars once you've done the R&D on developing a new car. And it's close to another $100 billion. Now, and we're talking about Canada, where we make 1.8 million cars a year. 80% are exported to the United States. Yeah. Okay, so we're talking making 500,000 cars a year, and you've got to put billions and billions into R&D and capital expenditures. It's just not, it's not on. The arithmetic doesn't work. The numbers don't add up. But these are people dealing at 50,000 feet without looking at any of the data to say, how feasible, how credible, how realistic is this? And I think it's driven because there's so much anger at the United States. It's always been an anti-Americanism in Canada, all my life at least.
Part of the identity, yeah.
And Conrad Black has written about this extensively. Yeah. But with Trump, it's become exacerbated. And so people are being driven by their anger and their emotions, not by logic or the evidence-based reality of who we are and the fact that we are next door to the world hegemon, the world's most powerful nation on planet Earth.
Yeah. Professor, I want to wrap with this question because you're not the only one giving presentations right now. I testified before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration Tuesday. One of the concerns I voiced was that of David Dodges, the former GBOC, who has warned, coming out of our immigration moonshot as of 2021, that the last thing we want is a bunch of low productivity businesses hanging on because we provide them cheap labor. Not only seemingly would that continuation of sort of the large scale temporary cog economy be bad for productivity, but there's also a big risk that it contributes to further wage suppression and job displacement for Canadian workers. I appreciate the concerns of our business lobby. I get that I was on the panel with a guy who was looking for welders. And I'm saying my remarks and he's going like, come to my factory in Quebec. Like, I can't find people. So I appreciate the high skill, the need there. But how do we balance what our companies are telling us that they need while also realizing that we surely can't go continuing, down this path of creating this sort of surf-like economy?
Okay. I understand completely. First off, I do support immigration. I support controlled immigration.
Same.
Okay. For the last 10 years, I will use a very, very strong word. I believe that the government of Canada, the Trudeau government, sabotaged our bipartisan agreement that ran from the 60s until the last 10 years, a very strong bipartisan recognition of the need for controlled immigration that serves the interests of Canada.
Yes, sir.
Brian Mulroney famously said we're a nation of immigrants and we need to bring in immigration to serve our needs. So I'm very much in the school that we're not doing immigration as a social benefit for the world. We're doing it because it's in our national interest. And that means then we have to identify where the interests are. And I agree with David Dodge, and I think that what Mr. Trudeau did, and I'm not trying to pick on him, it's just he did announce the policies. They tripled immigration, and they went from an immigration policy, and this has been written up by immigration scholars, where we went from a point system that brought in people with high skills, engineering, for example, engineering skills, not just one, there's many others. And we went from one extreme to not extreme, but we went from that very targeted policy approach to bringing in people that were very unskilled, low skilled, and uneducated or very poorly educated. And I thought it was an enormous mistake because now we brought in people that are low productivity at a very time when our productivity has been collapsing and declining precipitously. And so I'm not one of those people who say shut down all immigration. What we have to do is return to a system of immigration that's controlled and that serves the interests of Canadians and is based on the needs of the skills that we don't have. Just I want to give you one little vignette so people don't think that I'm just being personal about Trudeau at all. Harper passed a policy that said, which I had strongly supported for a long time, saying that if you apply to come to Canada, it is one of the conditions you must have, along with the points and the skills, you must be already fluent in English or French, one of the two official languages. And I just thought this was just the most obvious policy you have, because if you bring someone in who can't speak English or French, that means they cannot work. Because the reality is that's the language of this country, English in English Canada and French in French Canada. When Mr. Trudeau came into power, he removed that requirement. And so we brought in all kinds of people who can't speak English or French. So what are we doing? We are condemning them and exploiting these people, hurting these immigrants by forcing them onto social assistance because they can't work. Speaking a language from halfway around the world that isn't spoken in Canada will not allow you to work anywhere in Canada.
No, and it means you're not going to integrate either, right? Like you're going to balkanize within a small community,
But you're
increasingly
hurting.
less small.
The argument is, well, we're sensitive and we're compassionate. This policy was not compassionate. This policy, I thought, was viciously discriminatory towards vulnerable new Canadians who had no idea when they came here what the country's like because they're from halfway around the world. And we said, come on in, everything's going to be fine, and they couldn't speak and get a job. Yeah. And so I don't call that compassionate. I just call that, it's a form of discrimination against vulnerable immigrant Canadians. And we should bring back that rule that says you must be fluent in either English or French so you can function the moment you hit the ground in the country.
Completely agree.
Pernicious and destructive policy that was developed some 8 years ago.
I'm in the hub with Dr. Michael Bonner, who worked on the immigration file, arguing the same thing, where even the United Nations condemned our explosion the last few years as a modern form of slavery, where the liberals can't pat themselves on the back for what is in essence a basement apartment economy. And there are 15 people to those basements. And so lots of common sense, Professor. Thank you. The word of the day, everybody, is propinquity. Let's remember that one. I'm gonna go look that up. But Professor, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.